At some point, most of us have been jostled from a daydream by someone saying, "Hello, can you hear me?" Once in a while, it might be a real question of hearing, but for most of us, it's about listening. Listening may feel a little out of place in a communication series, but in truth, it's half or more of everything we communicate. We don't have the right context or the right strategy for sharing our messages if we don't listen to what others are saying. Like, if you've ever been in a discussion-based class, you might have experienced conversations that weren't so much an exchange of ideas among classmates as a bunch of people talking to the professor or teacher. And in fairness, it's a lot of mental energy to listen well and try to prepare our own contribution to the conversation. But an imbalance between speaking and listening can be pretty bad for creating conversations that build and collaborations that work. Let's learn how people listen and use that knowledge to help us listen a bit better. I'm Cassandra Ryder, and this is Study Hall, Intro to Human Communication. Listening is defined as the learned process of receiving, interpreting, recalling, evaluating, and responding to verbal and nonverbal messages. When you put it that way, listening starts to sound like not one thing, but a bunch of different ways that we engage with the messages others send. It's no wonder that the first few months of life are dominated by it. With no prior language, babies amass the ability to speak in their first few years of life purely through an incredible volume of listening. We do so much more than just acquire our own voices by listening, though. It is one of the primary ways we learn new information, whether it be fresh family news from our great aunt who calls every Thursday night, or facts from a cool video series on the internet. Most of us could listen better, at least in some circumstances, and the best way to figure out how to do that requires digging into the listening process. So let's play by play the steps to listening. First, there's receiving. Receiving is where we gather audio and visual cues from our environment as a listener. However, receiving is more than just hearing, which is a passive physiological processing of sound. Receiving is a more active form of attention to the input you're getting. Receiving is not entirely ear-based. We put a ton of cues together when we listen. Nonverbal cues like facial expressions and eye contact impact how we receive verbal messages. Like, think about the difference between a screen reader reciting a text from your friend and actually talking to them in person. Tone, inflection, body language, and other visual cues help us reinforce what the words themselves say. In sign languages, these facial expressions are so key that they form part of the grammar used to communicate messages. Receiving can be impeded internally by emotions or thoughts, which are known as psychological noise. Your own strong annoyance at one friend might be a bit of a bullhorn, keeping you from truly receiving what a different friend is saying. There's also external environmental noise, like actual bullhorns, or loud music, or the sounds of other people talking. While everyone's ability to receive is impacted to some degree by noise, some of us are more affected than others. And it's not a matter of willpower either. Some of us are completely distracted by loud noises or other nearby conversations, and others have hearing loss that means a quiet environment is essential to hearing. So when we want to get better at receiving, we manage our environment, like taking the conversation to a quieter place, and we manage our own minds, maybe by asking for a few minutes to clear our heads before we get into an important moment of listening. The interpreting stage comes next, and it's where we combine all the information we're receiving to make meaning and connect it to other experiences. We form as accurate a picture of what the person is trying to say as possible. This stage is generally seen as being about just understanding, translating someone's phrasing into the way that makes their message make sense to us. However, interpreting doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're also starting to form connections with what we've heard in the past and how this message relates to other things we know and believe. It makes sense then that interpretation leads into the third stage, evaluating. Here we judge the message on its credibility, completeness, and worth, as well as how much it changes our other perceptions. There are things we can do to improve these two stages as well. We develop critical thinking skills over our lifespans that help us interpret, but we can also purposefully study how communication works, like we're doing now. This helps us become more critical listeners, able to evaluate better. That being said, it's easy to put too much focus on evaluating who is speaking rather than what they are saying. If we let our first judgments of the person or their background color everything they say, we may evaluate so fast that we're essentially skipping over the other steps involved. The final part of listening is responding. This doesn't mean offering a cutting retort, but rather the verbal and nonverbal ways that we signal that we really are getting the message. This could be small assents like during pauses, or nodding. This is the stage before the person is finished speaking. Ideally, we want this stage to continue until we know they're done. Part of responding well as a listener is to acknowledge the speaker and avoid interrupting with our own message. After the person completes their message, our listening may technically be over, but we can show that we've listened carefully with a variety of verbal and nonverbal cues. In particular, if the statement they've made is surprising or causes another strong emotion, we can start with paraphrasing back what we heard to ensure we didn't miss anything. This is often called active listening, and it could start with a simple phrase like, What I'm hearing you say is, it's a way to give the speaker a chance to refine their statements before we share our own thoughts. Similarly, if the message seems to be missing something key, we can ask clarifying questions like, could you give me an example of that? Or, wait, what did they do next? As you can see, a lot is happening in the course of just one statement and its listener's response. So it makes sense that there is quite a bit of variation in what different people pay attention to during a listening experience. So even as each person follows the same 4 stages, they may zero in on specific things, exhibiting their preferred style of listening. For starters, a people-oriented listener is focused on offering support and evaluating the state of the speaker. For instance, their clarifying questions may be about how the person feels or what they need. These types of listeners are often sought out for their kind and understanding listening style. An action-oriented listener, on the other hand, is focused on the plan and what next steps will be needed based on what they are hearing. Conversations with disorderly or rambling details are harder for this kind of listener, who wants to get to work. They may be just as caring as people-oriented listeners, but their focus is on how action can help the person, which may rush the conversation a little bit. Similarly, a content-oriented listener is all about listening to complex information and processing it in all of its nuance. They may get lost in requesting all the details and understanding as much of the truth as possible, not noticing as much about the person or the potential next steps. Finally, there are time-oriented listeners who are focused on how long an exchange is taking more than they are on any element of the message. People who are already late for something and dislike being late, or who have a cram-packed schedule, may be time-oriented when they listen. Research shows that 40% of people have more than one preferred style. For instance, a time-oriented listener could very easily also be an action-oriented listener, preferring short messages that lead immediately to action. More often, however, people must switch between the listening styles in response to their circumstances and the needs of the speakers. A single day of listening tasks could be best served by using all 4 listening orientations at one time or another. Leanne is running a build site for a nonprofit that constructs affordable housing using lots of volunteer labor. Her day requires a lot of hammers, nails, and plywood, but even more so, it requires listening. She puts on her action-oriented style when starting the day, listening to the plans of each team lead working on the build, but also subtly moving the conversation forward so that everyone can get to work. She uses a content-oriented listening style as one of the on-site plumbers explains the issues they are having with a certain batch of pipes. But when she sees that someone on the other side of the house is waving her over, she has to table that conversation and use a time-oriented style in order to listen to a more urgent message. That person is requesting to leave early because of a family emergency and is clearly very worried. Leanne shifts immediately into a people-oriented listening style, where she focuses on what will help that volunteer most, like whether someone else can drive him so that he doesn't have to process the bad news while driving. By switching between the types of preferred listening styles, Leanne balances the needs of her volunteers against the demands of the project, demonstrating task effectiveness and relational appropriateness, which we discussed in another episode on being a competent communicator. This keeps people coming back to volunteer and ensures that those faulty pipes get addressed too. Listening is such a powerful part of how we live and work with others. It's one of the ways we get our needs met. It's also how we build bonds with our partners and family members. Listening well creates an expectation about how we're going to support each other and help each other to get our needs met. People will believe we care about them and value them a lot more if we really listen to them rather than saying, "I value you," and then tune out to play a game on our phones while they're talking. Listening is even how we learn about ourselves. We spend a lot of time in our own heads, but the way other people speak to us and about us can have a big impact on our self-concept, or the things we feel and think about ourselves. With all of these valuable results, it makes sense to reflect on our own process of listening and the styles we tend to turn to. Doing so might help us adjust to situations a little more flexibly and listen more fully, so we truly hear what others are saying. Thanks for watching Study Hall, Intro to Human Communication, which is part of the Study Hall project, a partnership between ASU and Crash Course. If you liked this video and want to keep learning with us, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about Study Hall and the videos produced by Crash Course and ASU in the links in the description. See you next time!